Today's unpopular opinion on Reddit is: the real enemy is China. People on the left think people on the right are evil racist Nazis. People on the right think people on the left are communist bandits. A lot of people just don't give a shit about politics. While you guys are busy hating each other and tearing the country apart, the leaders of CCP are probably sharding with uncontrollable laughter. A cursory search on Google will reveal that China has been very active in the Indo-Pacific, and it's making people anxious. So much so that our Prime Minister announced a $270 billion plan to arm Australia. You guys are so busy hating each other and calling each other names to notice the actual CCP authoritarians that are growing in power and growing bolder and bolder, and guess what, they hate all of us Westerners. So please, for all of our sake, America, just stop fighting each other. The media is lying to you. The politicians are lying to you. The real struggle is not left versus right. It's authoritarianism versus freedom. The West is a corpse being eaten by maggots. The right supports the corpse, the left supports the maggots. If I were a foreign power trying to destabilize the Western world in order to ascend to the world leadership position, while the West is busy destroying itself, I would be pretty satisfied with the current state of things. I agree completely. As someone on the right, I'm nearly to the point of thinking that things can't be fixed and that we are watching the early stages of the West completely destroying itself. It is the curse of modernity. I think we have it so good that we lose a perspective and begin to eat ourselves from within. The quest for ideological purity is a dangerous one, we all knew it, but for some reason everyone did it anyway. Hot take. The West didn't used to be a corpse, that's the thing. Before the rise of tech giants and censorship and the downfall of the middle class, the West was the safest, most technologically advanced society in the history of the world. So when the right wants to bring freedom back to the West, they are not supporting this so-called corpse. The right really just wants their form of tyranny, not actual freedom. The right I know of just wants things to go back to the way they were from the 60s until recently. They aren't the ones calling for radical change. They stand for the exact same things that JFK and Reagan stood for. Decent life for normal people. The 60s prior to the Civil Rights Act? The Vietnam War so they can pretend to be heroes like their parents? The 60s where the color of your skin determined where you could get a drink? No. The 60s where all Americans gained rights under the law. The 60s when racists were being eradicated from society. A time when people believed that change could come without tearing down the most free country in the world. Cancel culture is not freedom. Agreed. It's also important to note that the Chinese people are innocent and we shouldn't attack them. The real threat is the CCP. There are a lot of Chinese people, and I think it's probably the majority, that are just as racist supremacist as their government. I have seen a lot of hidden camera interviews where a lot of Chinese people are totally okay with what their government is doing because it is increasing Chinese power, influence, and wealth. The second largest political group outside of the CCP are the nationalists, and in a lot of ways they are even worse than the CCP. The Chinese people have an awful lot of issues, and I don't think they are innocent in a lot of this. As a Chinese living in a country where China is bullying us, I can somewhat confirm this. A lot of them still buy into the motherland mentality, and it's ridiculous. The expansion of wherever your ancestors came from has no real benefit to you. It's largely just racial pride. That being said though, a lot of them do actually have strong ties within China, such as relatives or business partners, so those ones I suppose have a sensible reason to root for China's success. Still leaves a bad taste in my mouth though. Stop lying about the Chinese. The Chinese people overwhelmingly support the CCP, and this is based on Western studies. They are happy with their GDP doubling in the last 10 yesterday. They are still growing faster than any country. Elon Musk even said their economy will be 3x bigger than America's. Wouldn't you think that the CCP has the mandate of the Chinese people with 90 million members and higher approval ratings than in the 2000s? The media is lying to you? The politicians are lying to you? Sounds like you pointed out some enemies at home pretty easily, and yet you want to focus on another country and do what about it exactly? Go to war with them? We should be focused on fixing what's broken at home before deciding to meddle with others' business abroad. After all, it's the politicians and corporations at home continuing to do business with China, no matter how or what people feel about it. Yeah, our country may be going down the drain. Our treasury literally printed $2 trillion to the corporations that own our politicians. We have dropped several thousand bombs in the Middle East and Africa this year already, which primarily killed children. But never forget that these people halfway across the world without even a blue water navy are the real enemy. One of our issues is we don't have a serious threat to focus or outrage at. Add that to politicians more corrupted than a file that has been copy-pasted a few billion times, and tech giants who don't give a fuck about politics unless it gives them more money, and we have a real Damocles sword over our heads. If you think China is evil, you are being played. I am an American, and I see a lot of criticism of China happening on this website. It's my belief that criticism is, at best, completely unproductive, and at worst, deeply harmful both to the Chinese and to Americans. Have you ever stopped to think about how strange it is that being tough on China is one of the only bipartisan political positions in the US right now? Have you ever wondered who benefits when we attack China? It's not Chinese citizens. A shitposted meme about the CCP disappearing people isn't going to help any Chinese citizens. It's also not US citizens who are helped by criticizing China. We're not affected by what China does in China. The only party that benefits is the US government, which has primed its population to believe that, 1, anything positive China does for its people, e.g. building a high-speed rail system connecting the entire country and allowing for unprecedented geographic and economic mobility, is somehow actually bad or evil, no matter what it is, and 2, anything the US government does to its own people, i.e. locking up over 2 million Americans, failing to require employers to pay workers a living wage, failing to guarantee food or shelter, etc., can't be that bad, because at least we are not in China 1. Now at this point I shouldn't need to state this, but to be clear, I am not arguing China is perfect. What I am saying is that the US could stand to learn a lot from China, from what's working for them and from what hasn't. We gain nothing in unthinkingly criticizing China, but a warped vision of its people, of its government, and worst of all, of our own government. The US could stand to reform its own white supremacist, classist, anti-worker, anti-intellectual, climate change denying government before it criticizes a country that has achieved more for its people in a human lifetime: poverty alleviation, public housing, public transport, public healthcare, etc., than the US has in its entire history. The US government has a long and storied history of spying on, blackmailing, and assassinating political dissidents and undesirables. Over 120,000 Americans, mostly poor black folks, are dead due to the US's recklessly negligent response to COVID-19. The US has 2% of the global population and 20% of the global prison population. Cops kill 2 black men a week, every year. People on this website would rather feel comfortable in criticizing a nation of over 1 billion people that they've never seen than reckon with the amount of blood on their own country's hands. I can guarantee you that any criticism you have of China's government today, even valid criticism, the US is equally guilty of that same thing, or more guilty. At the end of the day, while we live in a glass house, we shouldn't be throwing stones. The government is brainwashing people to hate China to cover up their own failures. China literally bailed America out during the Great Recession. They doubled their GDP since then, and they haven't spent a penny on war. Meanwhile, the Republicans and Democrats are run by special interest groups. The freaking governor of California is Nancy Pelosi's cousin. This is the type of government the world needs to conform to? Isn't China currently putting Muslims into concentration camps? This is the correct answer. But the propaganda is super strong. The US government realizes that China is rising and will be bigger and more powerful than the US in a few years. So now they're trying to wage a culture war against China, possibly to gain support for an actual war in the future. Fun fact, the top 4 largest banks in the world are Chinese. The first US bank comes in at number 6. My country has suffered enough under US hegemony. Whether that'll be better or worse under China remains to be seen. For what it's worth, I believe both the US and China to be enemies of the free common men. Silly comment. Stop blaming America for your country's problems. Imagine if they live in a Middle Eastern country that America has run into and completely destabilized. The Middle East has been a shithole forever. America helped it so much, right? It might not be such a shithole if America didn't decide to run in and completely destabilize it. When was it ever stable? The only thing that can help those people is another 2 million years of evolution. Mate, it was never stable, but it might not be in such a shit position if America hadn't made it worse. Middle East? Try the entire continent of South America. That mess is our fault too? There's no our. You're a 14-year-old alt-right hipster sucking dirt in your mother's basement. Nothing that happens in the world involves you. That you can't see the nuance between suffering from international US policies designed specifically to influence my country and blaming every single issue on America speaks volumes to the inequality of the American educational system. I agree with you to an extent. The internal fighting you see in America is because there is an alarming amount of nationalism and threads of authoritarianism within our own government, and it truly is a fight of authoritarianism versus freedom. Chinese people stealing IP and other knowledge for the benefit of China are cancer, along with those touting anti-US culture messages throughout our media. Cowboys are now gay. Statues of historic figures are being trashed. The entire system is being challenged, even though it is still the best human system on the planet. China is not the enemy, Americans are their own enemy. We can't even wear a mask so that our fellow citizens won't die of a virus. Healthcare prices are through the roof in the name of capitalism, and we're shutting down our borders to immigrants. Get a seizure and go bankrupt paying just ambulance fees. We're intolerant to minority communities and are entitled privileged fucks who only care about ourselves because rights. We keep defunding school programs and education, while our military budget is twice the size of an European country's GDP, but sure, China is the enemy. I have friends who are scared they might die at a traffic stop because they were reaching for their wallet to show an ID. We're still the only developed nation with inexcusable gun violence, and 5-year-olds have to regularly pretend there's some deranged motherfucker coming to their classrooms to shoot them. Free meals for poor middle school students is still a controversial topic. 1% of our population owns 70% of the wealth, and most people are 3 paychecks away from poverty. But yeah, let's vilify China because why not? Who gives a fuck about the South China Sea? Obviously China does some inhumane and atrocious crimes that should be looked into, but if anything causes the downfall of the West, it won't be China or Russia or Iran or whatever country the US decides to sanction next, it will be America. And we have nobody to blame but ourselves. This is awkward to respond to, since the American duopoly is unified and hell-bent on getting the American populace to blindly hate China. I don't think Democrats would significantly deviate from a Republican administration, except for maybe waging a more incompetent version of Trump's trade war. I personally think Iran should be the primary target of freedom-loving people. But Russia, China, or North Korea are all viable options. Hello, Moish. It's the %1.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for tomorrow's unpopular opinion.